Point Blank is a crime fiction podcast. It may not be suitable for all listeners. We discuss violence in all its forms. The works we reference may include period slang, which some listeners may find offensive. The hosts also have a tendency to swear.
Episode 55, Blacktop Wasteland by SA Cosby. Welcome back, Point Blank listeners. As always, my name's Kurt, and joining me is Justin. How are you today, Justin?
I'm well, Kurt. Thanks for asking. It's been a little while, and I'm excited to talk about this book. It's a book we've both read and enjoyed, presumably, but it's springtime in Albuquerque. The leaves are beginning to bud. The sun's out, and while it's still a little brisk, there's hope. So I'm feeling hopeful today, and I have a glass of ice and whiskey, and I'm looking forward to chatting about blacktops and crime and racial tension in Virginia.
Yeah, this is a good one. You're right, Justin. I'm just sporting the coffee and water today, so I guess I'll just be caffeinated. But you're right, and this is a pretty new book, listener, so I think, Justin, I don't think you're going to disagree with me if I just say, hey, if you haven't read this and you don't want any spoilers, go read this book, because I think we're both going to recommend this pretty strongly. It's Blacktop Wasteland, SA Cosby. He's a very good writer, and I think you'll enjoy it. So if you want to read it, go do that. Come back to the program. No problem.
I agree with that, though I did make an effort to not spoil it in my review in the first part of the show. But clearly, when we dive in deeply, we're going to be talking about some things toward the end that are going to reveal things. So if you want to hear the review, feel free. It's spoiler-free. After that, you're entering into dangerous territory.
I think we will stay away from the very end, but yeah, this is a strong recommendation, so check it out if you want. So, yeah, anything else going on before we dive into this Blacktop Wasteland? This, I don't know, is Car Noir a genre now, Justin? Because it seems like this has been kind of popular lately.
I would say that cars is, having cars in your stories is so quintessentially American that if it wasn't a genre already, it should have been invented, and maybe this is just a doubling down on that. But I'm surprised that there aren't more stories that are focused on car lore and car life and classic cars and hot rods tethered to crime and criminality and trouble.
Yeah, because I do think this is a mini genre. I mean, there is a lot of car lore stuff. I mean, there's even a lot of car crime fiction, but it seems like we're getting a little bit of resurgence in that recently, because obviously this one is we're gonna talk about it. But I've also mentioned She Rides Shotgun on the show.
Yeah, that's true.
Which that was a really good book. And then do you remember the name of the author?
Jordan Harper. Jordan Harper wrote that, and it won an Edgar. He's an anarchist. He's a troublemaker, which is a little side note.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I think he's doing screenwriting in L.A., but that book won an Edgar, and that was really well regarded. I wouldn't consider it Car Noir to the same extent that this one is. This is like
No.
racing and like the intricacies of making sure your hot rod is at maximum peak performance in order to do things like totally out of my league. I have no idea. I don't know what the fuck Bug is doing, and I don't know if Cosby is a car enthusiast or if he did a lot of research, but definitely new information for me, sort of like the maritime noir version, maritime noir on the road. I can't speak to the quality of the specificity of the language of this Car Noir as we talk about it. Are you familiar with cars at all, enough to have a sense of what he's discussing in this book?
No, not to the great detail. I mean, a little bit, maybe more than you do, but not by leaps and bounds.
Sure.
No. I do know that in one of the interviews, and we can get into this later, but Cosby mentions that the Bug, our main character in this book, the car that is featured is based on a car that the author's father owned at one point. So he must know a little bit. But I mean, I think we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but the book really does sort of tap into that American love of cars, and not just cars, but that bootlegger kind of Southern background, Southern rural background. And that's a very key Rule Noir is a key part of this book. So I was just going to mention one more book that I believe I've mentioned on the show before that fits into this category, and that was Eric Beatner's Rum Runners. That has a few similarities with this book as well. So if you read this one or this stuff sounds interesting, those are two other books you could possibly check out. But before we get ahead of ourselves, Justin, maybe we should give that summary of what's going on here in Blacktop Wasteland.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. And also, I wanted to say I'm interested in Rum Runners. I've read Beatner before, and I've enjoyed his work, but I have not read that specific book. So thanks for reminding me. The review of Blacktop Wasteland by SA Cosby. This book was published in, I believe, 2020 by Flatiron Books, and it tells the story of our protagonist, Beauregard, quote, Bug Montage. And I'm not sure if I'm getting his last name correctly, but his go name, his common name is Bug, B-U-G. Bug is a 30-something married man with kids in Southern Virginia. He owns a car repair shop where he employs his cousin Kelvin. And money-wise, things are not going great. The business is facing stiff competition from the new Precision Auto Shop. Also, in terms of his background, Bug is a fast car enthusiast. He's not just doing car repair as a job. It's also partly a passion, partly his background and his history. He has his estranged father's car, which Kurt mentioned briefly. It's called Duster, and it plays a major role in the story. He street races from time to time for money. The story actually opens with a street race where some trouble happens, and we get a sense of who Bug is as a character. He used to engage in more criminal antics than he does now to make money, but he's put that aside, or he attempts to put that life behind him. He wants to be there for his kids. He wants to be there for his wife, unlike his father, who chose a life of crime and a life of running over life with the family. Bug is not his father, so he thinks, but S.A. Cosby does not let Bug off the hook that easily. In short, Cosby creates the conditions in Bug's life that force him to need money badly. In part, he needs money to save his failing business in order to help his family, and in another part, he needs money to help keep his mother in a nursing home. She's way deep in debt, and they're about to kick her out, and there's no place for her to go. So he agrees to take part in a jewelry store heist that's been organized by this dude Ronnie, who's sort of a white, but a poor white Appalachian man, and his brother Reggie, and this wild card man named Quan. So Bug is hesitant about the heist. He's hesitant about working with Ronnie. They had experience working together in the past, and it didn't go too well. So these should all be little red alerts in the mind of the reader. They're like, oh, why is he involving himself with these people? Why? Because he's desperate. When you don't have money, when you have needs to meet, you will do things that you wouldn't normally do. So, of course, the heist, which is the first half of the book, really, it goes poorly. A couple people get shot, one gets killed, but ultimately our boys, Bug and company, get the goods. All is good and done. He's back home. He goes out with his wife and some friends. He goes out with Kelvin. They celebrate. Things are going good. He made the money. He'll be able to save his business. Of course, we're only at the halfway point on the story, so we're bound to run into more trouble. There's no way around it. And that turns out to be the case. The goods stolen in the heist were actually diamonds that would belong to a local crime boss named Lazy. And Lazy's not very happy that he lost these diamonds because they're tethered to the success of his business, and they're tied to some rival crime gangs, and things are just fucked up on the top, and obviously that heat's going to come back down on Bug and Ronnie and the others. So in the meantime, this isn't just about the crime heist. This is about Bug and his family. There's a lot of attention paid by Cosby to Bug, his relationship with his two sons, Javon and Darren, and his wife Kia. There's a lot of intimacy and very heartfelt love in this family. It's very true. It feels real. And in one incident, after the heist happens, but before the second half of the book really heats up, the son, Javon, who's the older son, he knows that Bug's auto shop is struggling, and he had heard whispers about Precision being the culprit, being the reason why his auto shop is suffering. So he does his dad a solid by burning down the Precision auto shop. He goes to a sleepover at this rich kid's house and then sneaks out in the middle of the night, burns down Precision, comes back. Nobody is the wiser. Of course, I think this is one of the most critical moments of the book in terms of the heart and spirit of this book. This moment, of course, he's not revealed by the cops. Nobody knows that he's done this except for Bug, but this strikes fear deep in Bug's heart. Will his son follow him into a life of crime, perhaps prison and an early death? Will his son repeat the same path that Bug took, that he learned from his father? So this is a lot of the story is really about fathers and sons, about passing on a lineage, about the lack of upward mobility, the lack of a way to escape a life of desperation. So I thought that was an interesting move by Cosby that helped clarify what this book was truly about. Anyway, let's move on. There's a heist. The bad guy comes in. His name is Lazy, and he tracks down Ronnie and he tracks down Quan. And they're not easy. They're not difficult to track down. They're really sloppy and they're scared and they're foolish. Soon after, Bug is captured and threatened along with his family. Bug is ordered to do a job for this crime boss. All of them are required to go make up for the loss of the diamonds by going down south and stealing from a rival crime boss in North Carolina. Their job is to steal a truck filled with platinum, and the name of the crime boss is Slade Shade, I believe. And if they do well, they will live. And of course, Bug doesn't believe this. He thinks he's going to die no matter what happens. So he begins to scheme around trying to make this work in his favor. Bug knows that the crime boss will kill him when he gets back. He has to do the job to keep his family from being threatened. Unfortunately for him, this means working again with Ronnie. They team up, and Ronnie, it's clear that he does not trust him, but he has no choice. He feels his hands are tied in this situation. He reluctantly brings his cousin Kelvin into it. Kelvin is enthusiastic. He wants to support his cuz, and he does, and they all head down to North Carolina. Now, do they pull off this second heist, this climactic heist? Well, I won't spoil it here. I'm not going to tell you how that ends up, but I will say that it is worth the read. Overall, this is an impressive read. I think Bug is a complex, flawed, sometimes unlikable character who is drawn by Cosby with surprising and impressive depth, and I walk away feeling compassionate for him despite his weaknesses. He's honest with himself, or he tries to be, and ultimately he does what's right when he can for his family. Also, I think there are a lot of twists and turns in this story in terms of plotting that kept me reading with curiosity. At first, I was wondering how the hell they were going to make this story work after the heist goes pretty much successfully by 50%. So Cosby makes this, an interesting read all the way through. Every time I think the book is going to steer straight and head towards the finale, another twist or surprise ratchets up the tension, leaves me scratching my head. Once in a while, things feel a little bit too convenient, like when Bug learns that the dude he helped get to the hospital during the heist turns out to be the guy who gets killed at the jewelry shop. Some of those little conveniences feel a little bit too well placed, but overall, those aren't major distractions from the overall success of this story. Overall, I kept waiting for this book to slow down, or for Cosby, who's relatively new to the genre, to writing on the high level, and he doesn't drop the ball. I mean, this is a good book, a very good book, and I would recommend this book with enthusiasm from start to finish. We can talk about the things we love and maybe the things that were minor weaknesses, but overall, this is a great plot, great characters for the most part, and a great story. I want to give it 5 hits, but because of minor issues, I'm going to give it 4.75, which is still a damn good review. Kurt, what do you feel about that in terms of my hit count and my overall assessment?
Well, I'll put it this way, Justin. I do think that this is a modern classic in the noir genre. I really enjoyed it. I think it's great. I do think there are a couple of flaws. Like you said, I can, not going to nitpick on that because they're minor. But really, this, first of all, I've gone off on this before about how noir is not a genre that is stuck in history. It is an ever evolving genre. Here's the proof right here.
Yeah.
This is what, I believe in our episode 51, when we got into like some of the things we'd like to see in the genre, it was one of the things that came up was more rural noir. This is definitely rural noir. It's Southern rural noir, which is great. And more importantly, it's Black Southern noir, rural noir, which is pretty rare in the genre. And it's exceptionally well written. I really enjoyed it. I didn't feel that Cosby really takes his, excuse the pun, foot off the gas through most of this book. And I felt that not only was it a great crime story, but it was a great human story as well. And that you touched on that, this family dynamic of the story of fathers and sons, but also a man, his mixed, like the sort of this mixed notion of his masculinity, providing for his family, but still like, the conflict within all of that, right?
Absolutely.
And it that is, I think, something that people attempt to write a lot, or well, frequently, let's say, and I don't feel that it comes across very realistically all the time. But this felt real to me. These tough choices that Bug has to make feel pretty legitimate, and that is a really difficult accomplishment to achieve in writing. And I think Cosby does that exceptionally well. I think I'm just gonna go ahead and give it a 5 out of 5, despite some little very minor quibbles. I think it's a book that in my brain I will return to, and I'll also use as a benchmark to measure other modern pieces of American noir against.
And that's totally fair. It is. I gave it a 5 on Goodreads. It's a 5 book. So I was being nitpicky with my rating. I'm going to stick with it, but totally legit. It's closer to a 5 than a 4. This is a classic. I would read this again. I've read it twice in the past 6 months, and it didn't lose anything in its second read. It actually gained some more things. I would read this again before I reread Farewell, My Lovely by Chandler, for example. It is better. This is better than most of Raymond Chandler. So I hope you hear that, Cosby.
Well, that is a strong compliment, and probably, certainly worthy. I mean, the one thing with that is that I'm always hesitant to do is like, I can only imagine what it was like to read Chandler when it came out at the time. This Cosby's, it feels timely, and that's also very important. That it feels timely to our current situation. And, that's, I think, a pretty important part of noir, but still universal themes that will hold up over time.
Agreed. There isn't a heavy overlay of BLM, racial justice stuff in this book. Obviously, there's some implication. This is a story that tries to reimagine and rearticulate a noir story from the perspective of a Black protagonist who is very dynamic, very fleshed out, very three-dimensional, and that often is something that lacks. That's not very common in noir fiction. So Cosby does a huge service to the Black community with this story. It speaks to current issues of racial justice in a way that's universal. But it's more than that. It's the individual. It doesn't focus on movements or on communities. This is about Bug. And I think if we want to start talking about characters, we can't really go very far before we talk about Bug, Beauregard, our protagonists, and what we really feel. How did you feel about this character? We spent a lot of time with him. He has he makes a lot of interesting moves, positive and maybe less positive in terms of his ultimate goals, what he wants to do for his family. What did you think about Bug? Did you ultimately think he was a redeemed or worthy, protagonist?
That's kind of a difficult question to pose in a way, because I don't really think it's necessarily a story about redemption. I think it's about a story about coming to terms with reality or seeing reality. Because a lot of what the story, I mean, Bug is our main character. And stepping back just a minute, I got from an interview that Cosby wanted to show Bug as, and I'm paraphrasing here, but amalgamation of the character of Easy Rollins and Mouse from Walter Mosley's work,
Uh-huh.
a southern version of Parker, which I could see that, and a little bit of Wendell Scott, who I had to look up, but that's the first black NASCAR driver.
Ah.
And I think he pulls that off if that's what he was focused, that's what he was trying to do, certainly so. Because this is a noir story, Bug is not a perfect character. He's not necessarily a hero character. He's a human being faced with difficult choices, and he, through the course of this book, makes choices that I think are a mixed bag, but are probably fairly realistic to how a lot of people would handle a situation like this. I think where he does show growth is how he connects to his own family and how he deals with the legacy or memory of his father, which really, I don't think this is ruining anything, but it's really basically a myth because he doesn't really have that many memories of his father. So most of his relationship there is something that he has constructed over the course of his life rather than a real interaction. So I think it's about coming to terms with reality.
I think that's fair, and you're right. We're not going to talk about the end right now, but in terms of noir, this is a noir book, and resolution or some kind of perfect, tidy conclusion is not going to happen in this book. And I loved Cosby for that. I love the way that this book ends. It's actually, I said the last line is beautiful. In terms of Bug as a character, there's parts of him that make me go, wow, what a Mary Sue. He's this badass. He can kick ass. He can fight. Nobody was ever in competition for him in terms of like brute strength or power or toughness. Also, nobody was in competition for him as a driver. He was the guy who could outdrive anybody. And, if he didn't have these other flaws and he didn't have the self-reflection, I would be rolling my eyes a little more at him because he is sort of like the ultimate badass super guy who does everything right. The reality is some of these decisions come back to hurt him. Some of them are decisions that he struggles with emotionally, intellectually, and he knows that he's fucking up sometimes, and he fights against it, and he struggles over it, and he ruminates, and he is in doubt. He has self-doubt. He's not a flawless superhero. He's a flawed, doubt-filled, heroic character who does what he needs to do, and sometimes he does things he shouldn't do for his family. I think his relationship with his two sons and his relationship with his wife, I think that's fairly well developed. I don't have an incredibly strong sense of his wife, Kia, but she does call him on his shit. She does try to hold him accountable. She's not nagging at him, but she's like, own up, man. Like, own up for your shit. Don't lie. She tries to hold him to a certain standard. His son, he has a sweet relationship with his kids. His older kid Javon, and then his younger kid Darren, they make corny jokes and just they just goof around, and it's charming and it's very endearing, and it does set up the stage for why he does what he does, and also makes it harder when he makes mistakes or when he goes over the top. I wasn't thinking about whether or not he'd end up in jail. I was thinking about, oh fuck, his kids. What is he doing? He's jeopardizing that relationship potentially, and for Cosby to make me feel that, I think is an effective job on his part.
Certainly, yeah. I do think part of it is interesting too, because even though the Bug is at least previously, well, I don't know how to say this because he is an outlaw, right? To an extent, but he's certainly at the beginning of this book, he's basically trying to go straight, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the struggles of reality of living in a small town in rural Virginia, in a place where one business can come in and ruin several businesses, a larger business. I mean, he's trying to go straight with this garage, and it doesn't work out for him. And he really doesn't want to get back involved in this life that he thought he put behind him. And I think that's kind of interesting, because I think it sort of is this, would he be, say his garage was doing great, right? And there wouldn't be a book then, but let's just say that. Would a person like this, like, really be dwelling on the criminal behavior of their father, or would they be saying, hey, I turned it around, great? That inner monologue wouldn't really be happening, because you'd be doing something different. So it's sort of, I think that speaks to living, they're not exactly living in poverty, but they're pretty darn close, right? Certainly paycheck to paycheck. And I think that sort of speaks to the idea that, or enhances rather, the nature of the difficult choices that have to be made in the book.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the majority of Americans are two paychecks away from poverty, two paychecks away from, two missed paychecks away from not being able to pay their rent. From some people, many people are in fact a couple paychecks away from being homeless. And given that we don't have much of a safety net, this is a real struggle for people. It's a psychic struggle. People struggle to face the reality that their lives are so incredibly precarious. And this is well captured here in this sort of rural, on the fringe of city, but very deeply rural life, where people are just small towning it, trying to get by, making ends meet. And it only takes one small change, one demand that wasn't anticipated. For example, the opening of Precision Auto, which sounds like a fucking chain store swooping in, even though it's a little more complicated than that, given who owns it and how that all turns out. But the second thing, the thing that is the final nail in the coffin, is the mother of Bug. She's in this nursing home. That's a little convenient that she's in the nursing home, and it's incredibly expensive because it forces her, Bug, to have to, like, it was like she's $40,000 in debt, or $48,000. Like, it's an incredible sum of money. It speaks to the expense of nursing homes, and the fact that we have inadequate infrastructure and culture for dealing with, in a positive and supportive way, our elders. But also it means, hey, who's going to pay this check? Like, what are you going to allow your mother to be thrown on the street? Or I guess she can't come to live with him for whatever reason. I'm a little bit fuzzy on why they couldn't have just solved that differently. But it does force him into an incredible bind. Most people don't have $50,000 they can pull out of their back pocket and hand to the money lender or whatever. So yeah, it's a desperate situation, and it's not uncommon. This isn't some kind of special recipe for Bug. This is something that I think a lot of folks who are, working class face these types of decisions, or certainly ones they fear.
And that's, I think, interesting, because this is not a heist book about getting rich. This is a heist book to preserve what he has gotten legitimately.
Yeah.
And the other thing too, that, and I don't want to get too much into the specifics of it here, but one thing I had kind of forgotten until something you just said is that he's a person who's dealing with a fair amount of childhood trauma. He, his father disappears at one point. It doesn't sound like his mother was that great of a mother. And he spends a significant time in juvie for something fairly violent, that he never has truly come to terms with.
No.
There's, he's a complex individual.
Yeah, and his mother now is not a friendly character. She's abusive toward him. She treats him like shit. And this is the woman he's serving, trying to help out of a bind financially. So I feel like there's an incredible amount of pressure on him. The pressure from his past, his father, his heroic image of his dad, despite the fact that his dad, as he comes to realize, wasn't all that heroic at all. He opted out when times were tough. His mother, who he's trying to save, try to protect, doesn't seem to care to protect him. And maybe that's one flaw. I would have loved to have a little bit more of a heart-to-heart, or a common understanding between them, a little more than there was, because it did seem like she just like railed on him. And meanwhile, he spends the entire fucking book trying to help her out. And it felt a little bit like he was taking abuse and not able to protect himself from it in a way that was, sort of a bummer.
Well, the one thing, as you mentioned, there's a couple of things in the book that are a little, too perfect or whatever. But one hole that I did see that I didn't quite understand is he has this guy who I don't think he's actually his uncle, but he refers to him as his uncle. The guy who owns the junkyard, I can't remember the character's name.
Yeah, Uncle Booney.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he seems to, at least as portrayed in the book, he seems like he has access to cash. So I don't really understand why he doesn't ask him for some help and avoid this whole situation. But I mean, that was in the back of my head.
That's true. I think that's a fair. I think that falls in the category of these convenient plot movers that allow us to get into the story of the heist and the trouble. There was the Booney situation that, yeah, I mean, had we explored that further, maybe Booney, who seems to have all the answers, he's the mentor. Whenever Bug's in a jam, he goes to Booney, and Booney has a way to help him out. He has cars. He can crush shit. He can make bodies disappear. He can help with supplies. Like, he has connections. Well, why don't those connections help save Bug from having to fucking go rob a jewelry store or do all this other crazy shit? That's a fair point. But I did like the Booney character. I liked it. Also helped to solidify the ruralness of this, having an old junkyard to go talk shop and try to work up a solution to problems. Another character that was, I guess I'm drifting into a few characters that we haven't mentioned yet, just to get a read on them. One of the other sub-protagonists was the cousin Kelvin, who works in the auto shop. He's pretty prominent in the book. He's regularly involved in the work. He helps Bug out in the second heist. What did you feel about Kelvin? Do you feel like he was a fully developed character or more of a stereotype?
I think he's actually a little bit more of a stereotype. I mean, I like him. He's probably one of the most like purely likable characters.
Yeah.
But he sort of is just the guy who's like, I'll go along with whatever Bug says,
Mm-hmm.
I'm here to help. And that's fine. I mean, that ultimately in this book, Bug is really the only character that gets a full treatment. But, Kelvin is a good character. I mean, I don't mind him being in the book. He plays a good role. You kind of need that person, right?
Well, it's helpful to have a sidekick, and it's not uncommon to have a sidekick. A lot of crime fiction involves a protagonist who has a helper along the way. I agree with you that Kelvin is underdeveloped. He's not. I don't know anything about him. He's sort of like a friendly, happy-go-lucky guy. He sort of jokes. He's like the adult version of Bug's younger son, Darren, the one who makes the jokes. Like, I feel like there's a little bit of a connection there. Sure. Darren as an older man, and but I liked Kelvin as he filled a role, and that's pretty much all I can say about him. He didn't diminish the book, but he wasn't a fully blossomed complex character in his own right. And I think the same could be said for a lot of these enemies, frankly. A lot of these bad guys. I think the ultimate antagonist in this story is in fact Bug. I think he's his own enemy. But I think the Ronnie is like the major other person protagonist who is constantly, creating conditions for Bug to have to struggle with, because Ronnie is a greedy son of a bitch who doesn't. He says one thing and does the other, and damn it, Bug should have learned his lesson before this book started. He already knew that Ronnie was up to no good. He had had experiences with Ronnie, and Ronnie wasn't trustworthy. And he tells us in the first 50 pages that Ronnie's not trustworthy, and yet he endures the first heist out of desperation with him, and finds out that again Ronnie isn't trustworthy, and then he has to endure another work situation with Ronnie, and that doesn't go too well overall either.
No, it really doesn't. And the thing about Ronnie, I mean, I find Ronnie to be kind of an interesting character because he's both I use this term jokingly, but mastermind of this particular heist.
Yeah.
But he also comes across believably as the kind of guy who would end up with that sort of information, right? And but I did like the depiction. I liked this depiction of this dude who, he never wears sleeves on his shirt. He's got sleeve tattoos of Elvis, just Elvis, but Elvis at different stages of his life. So,
Yeah.
young,
Yeah.
like, and I can totally picture this guy.
Yeah, it's like a Catholic church or something, like different stages in like the story of Christ or something, as viewed through Elvis tattoos.
Yeah, I can totally see this guy being at a small town car show, walking into a truck stop. It seems completely believable to me, even though he and his brother Reggie make some poor choices during the course of this book. But yeah, it is a little for how Bug is portrayed as being a relatively, smart criminal. Why he would get himself mixed up with Ronnie again, I guess is supposed to speak more to the desperation than anything else. But yeah, you'd think there maybe would have been a better choice.
Yeah, I think really that is it, and I think that's a little bit why Cosby oversold the desperation. I thought things were bad enough when his business was going wrong, but Cosby decided to like triple up on that by making the mom nursing home situation happen. I felt a little bit like, well, why do we need to have all these things happen at once? But that's really about maximum desperation. It means Bug's willing to work with people he won't trust, ultimately, because he doesn't have another option. He's not in the business. He doesn't have the connections. Kelvin's not going to help. Of course, he could have asked Booney. Again, one of those things that could have solved a lot of problems. Go to the guy who has a long legacy of not only loving and trusting Bug, but also working with and within criminal underworlds. That would have been a nice little fix there, but then Cosby wouldn't have signed a major book contract and put out this very successful novel. So
Yeah.
yeah, so it is what it is. We're stuck with Ronnie and his brother Reggie. Quan was we don't have to talk about Quan. Quan gets what he fucking deserves ultimately. Some other characters do too, but I won't talk about that. I think I want to mention briefly. We haven't talked about Lazy yet, and we should talk about Lazy. But also, I want to mention something about the structure of the story. Cosby does a great job of building suspense in this story. We think it's all going to be about this first heist, and of course, the heist as it begins to develop, we're with Bug. He's mapping out the heist. He's planning things. He's the planner. Ronnie is like the diet idiot planner. He doesn't really plan. He brings some people together and hopes that Bug will figure the rest of the shit out. Bug does. Within the first half of the book, we build up toward that first heist, and then the aftermath of that heist. At the 50% mark, that heist is over. And like I said, I was wondering how the story was going to hold court and carry steam into the second half. And I think Cosby does a really good job of not letting the protagonist off the hook for his choices. There are some sketchy choices made during the heist. Some people got killed who shouldn't have. And obviously Bug committed the heist with two sketchy people he shouldn't have worked with. All of that doesn't get excused. All of it comes back to haunt Bug and makes for the second half of the book. And I thought that Cosby did a really good job in terms of not stalling out the book, in terms of balancing the first half with the second half, because rather than concluding with just like some kind of trying to mop up all the bullshit from the first half, we actually get a second heist. We get bigger, scarier bosses. We get more stakes. We get more drama. We get more threats to the family. Everything gets ramped up, like second, third level, even a fourth level. And ultimately there's a final showdown between Bug and Ronnie, but there's also showdowns between Bug and the crime boss Lazy, and there's like higher stakes when Bug's family is threatened and his son Javon has to defend the family with a gun and has to kill people. So Javon not only sets fire to a precision auto body shop, he also murders some crime like dudes. So he's in it. Like the question of whether or not his Bug's sons can escape the cycle of violence and desperation and poverty, of class and racial injustice. It's clear. It's clear to me at the end that we're not sure that cycle has been broken. We're not sure that this is going to have a happy ending. We're not sure that Devon or Javon might not end up being exactly where Bug is, 30 years from now. So I wanted to say, like, that second half was a total surprise. Wasn't sure how Cosby was going to land it, but he totally fucking did.
Yeah, and that's a structure I really like in crime fiction. I don't want the crime necessarily to be the climax of the book. I want this to happen in this sort of style where we see one crime and then we see the aftermath of the fallout from that crime. And Cosby does that extremely well. As far as the pacing goes in this book, it came to my mind that in a lot of ways, the pacing in this book is like filming a car chase scene. There are times in the car chase scene where you want to see the tires screeching and them going around the corner, but it has to kind of come back a little bit and you got to be on the straightaway. And then there's going to be some more weaving. And then, like if it's constantly, if it's constantly a chaotic scene, you lose interest. If it's constantly a straight out drag race on the flats, it's going to be boring as well. So by mixing that together, I think the pacing of the book stays extremely good. And I had one last thing to say just about the characters in this book. Because this is Southern noir, it's modern Southern noir. And as a person who has been working in the South for the last, 6-7 years, with a lot of people from backgrounds similar to the characters in this book, I find the characters completely believable in the types of antics that they're up to. So good on Cosby for creating those believable characters.
Totally. What did you think about the character of Lazy? He's the crime boss that wants to get his money back. I want my money back because you stole my diamonds from that jewelry store. They didn't belong to you. That was part of a scam, part of a setup. So what did you think about Lazy and his henchmen? He had like a henchman named Burning Man and some others, this crew that was supposed to be dangerous and fear inspiring. Did you appreciate those characters or did you not have much of an opinion on them?
I did appreciate them from a sense that it was kind of an interesting collection of characters, I guess you could say. Mm-hmm. But they were all somewhat tropey. I didn't, I didn't feel that Lazy was extremely well developed, but I don't think that necessarily takes away from the point of the character. I mean, we can all understand that, hey, mob guy or whatever, organized crime guy's money gets stolen. He wants his money back and he's going to put the pressure on him. I don't know. I think maybe if had we seen a little bit more of the interworkings or web of his enterprise that earlier in the book, maybe that would have, maybe there could have been a way to have a little extra leverage or something. I'm not exactly sure why he trusts or even wants, like, why would you take these random guys who stole from you and have them do this job that's worth this kind of money? You'd kind of think you'd just do it themselves and not run the risk.
Yeah, why he could have just killed those guys and said, "Sorry, you failed me. You stole from me. You die, and now I will." I mean, it implies some kind of paucity of criminal elements who could, succeed in this. Unless he thought that they would fail. I don't know, but you're right. Another moment of convenience that we overlook because the pacing is good and we're invested in Bug's story, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think he did sort of mention, like, well, if they fail, we haven't lost anything. But, I mean, they were ambushing 2 cars on a rural road in the middle of nowhere. That could have been accomplished by,
Anybody,
and, well, not anybody. Well, they could have easily made that whole situation disappear. I don't know. But whatever, it works in the book. It gives us another car chase scene, too, so.
It does. Good. I think that's the setup. This was all about getting Bug from one situation to another where people had to get into their vehicles and cruise down 2-lane highways in the rural South. Because he is a good driver. I mean, it's fun to watch him drive. That the first heist, their escape from it where he goes backwards off of an unfinished highway bridge into a pile of sand. That was pretty crazy. It was pretty reckless, and I'm not a car guy, and I'm not easily sold by fictionalized car chase scenes, but that one was like, wow, that was a wow moment, and I admit it.
That had some real bootlegger feel to it to me.
Yeah,
That was or Dukes of Hazzard, if you will.
yeah,
But it was
pretty
good.
wild.
It was good.
Any other characters you want to talk about briefly before we sort of try to sum up this work?
Now let's get into summing it up, and then I'll talk briefly about Cosby just as an author and a little bit about him.
Sure. Plotting wise, this was a pretty well plotted book, very well plotted. There was a lot of elements, and there was very little gap. There's very little pacing issues like this. There was a consistently fast read, and the mellow parts were parts we actually focused on character. Like when they're at bars, Bug's at a bar with his wife and his friends, like that stuff was good. His moments with his kids, those were good, quiet moments that helped to reveal character, and that's what the quiet moment should be doing. In terms of themes, there's tons of themes about race and class and all that big stuff that we're not focusing on. We're just trying to focus more on how this book worked as a story. But all that stuff's there, and this story works in part because it deals with serious themes that matter deeply to a lot of people and should matter to all people, but does so in a way that's focused on a character, on an individual story, in a way, and it's an empathetic story and a passionate story, and a story of a real, fully developed human being with a lot of flaws. The style is good, hard-boiled. I mean, there's some violent scenes in this. This isn't all about a relationship of father and sons. There's also a lot of fucking dead people and a lot of trouble and a lot of torture and a lot of shit like that. So you get everything in this story. And the setting, that Southeast Virginia, a fictional county. What was the name of the county? The Red Hills or something? Red Hill County.
Red Hill.
Yeah. It's a fake place, but it captures generally the southeast area of Virginia. This is a 4.75 5-star book. It's well written. Cosby's only 46 years old, and he's written books before, but I look forward to seeing what he does next. Now he's got the money and the celebrity. Be curious to know where he takes that and whether or not we're going to see Bug again. Because folks, he does live. This isn't the noir where the protagonist dies. That's not the kind of story it is. And maybe there's another story that features Bug. We might have to wait and see on that one.
Yeah, that's a good way to wrap that up, Justin. I can't really disagree with anything there. Maybe I'll just go into, as you said, Cosby's only 46. He's got hopefully a long career ahead of him yet. We can look forward. Actually, he has another book coming out this summer, which sounds pretty interesting. It's called Razor Blade Tears, and it's about, I read this a while back, so I could be kind of wrong. But so two young men, one is black, one is white. They're together. They're in a relationship, and they get murdered for some reason. And their fathers, who do not share the same opinions about the world as their sons did, are sort of forced to come together and hunt down their killer. That sounds like a pretty interesting premise to me for a crime fiction novel. And if it's anything like this one, I am strongly looking forward to it. Let's talk just briefly here about SA Cosby. The S stands for Sean. As you said, he's 46 years old. He was born in Matthews County, Virginia, a very rural area. It was one of the poorest counties in Virginia. He describes himself as proudly Southern and proudly rural. He talks a lot about the different, we in the news, we hear a lot about one type of Southern heritage, and he's talking about a very different Southern heritage that he is proud of. So that's something he wants to convey in his writing, and I think he certainly does that in this book. He's a hiker, a chess player, and I noticed on his Twitter that he just recently ordered some throwing axes. So this sounds like a guy I wouldn't mind hanging out with for the afternoon. I don't know, sipping some shine and throwing axes at a stump or something like that. As I said, he did come from a poor background. He states that he didn't have indoor plumbing until he was 16 years old or so. He did go to college. He had to drop out to take care of his mother. He had all kinds of jobs: a bouncer, construction worker, retail manager. Briefly worked as a fast food chain mascot for an afternoon. I guess that didn't work out. And in one,
That's funny. I wish there was.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's video footage of him dressed up in his suit.
that would be interesting. In one interview, and I didn't see this anywhere else, but he said something about being a mortician's assistant, but they might have been confusing him for one of his characters, which I'll get into in just a minute. But so he had an uncle. The family read a lot. Everybody in the family did a lot of reading when he was younger. He had an uncle who introduced him to Travis McGee and Mike Hammer.
Ah.
He also was a big fan of Stephen King as a kid, and his goal was to be a black Stephen King. That was what he wanted to write horror. One of the things as an exercise his mom did as a kid was if he read a book and he didn't like the ending, she encouraged him to rewrite the ending to something that would be something he'd be happy with. So a nice writing exercise for a kid, and it's obviously paid off. As an adult, some of his writing influences, he pulls a lot from Joe R. Lansdale, who we've talked about before, the author probably most famously of the Hap and Leonard series. And then he said that's where he gets a little bit of humor into his writing. I can see that. And then Daniel Woodrell, who I've spoken of highly on the show, and I can see. I mean, good stuff. I really love that stuff. His books, he did start as a short story writer. He did win in 2019. He won an Anthony Award for the best short story for the Grass Beneath My Feet. Back in 2016, he won a distinguished short best American mystery story for Slant 6. His previous novels are Brotherhood of the Blade and My Darkest Prayer. That's one that I have on my shelf to read, and that's where the character is a mortician's assistant who sort of also doubles as a problem solver for the local community.
Uh-huh.
So I'm looking forward to that one. I think that might be good. And then, as I said, this summer, Razor Blade Tears will be coming out, and that is his next work.
That's exciting. It's good to know that he has some good backstory. I'll be curious to read that short story that he won the Anthony with, and also to see where he goes forward. Obviously, the things are looking bright. He's going to be a luminary. He already is. This is a classic work. At first, I imagined this episode being one where we focus on Virginia and like Middle Atlantic noir, but then that got a little complicated because sometimes you can make up a geography and say this is a region where things happen, and there's really not much happening there, or not in any kind of concrete way like Chicago or LA or noir or Brazil or whatever. So we ended up with this book, and I'm really glad we got to spend time with it. We committed ourselves not to spending time with modern reads for our deep dives. We wanted to focus more on classic works, but this was a worthy exception to that rule, and
I agree.
One I think will break, once in a while when we see a book as good as this, come across our hands. So,
yeah, go read it. It's a good one. So, Justin, now what do we have to look forward to in our next couple of episodes here?
So we've been doing a lot of negotiating. Kurt's work schedule shifts, and it's making some big changes in the next few months, and I have my school schedule. So we've gotten this far. We know what we're doing for the next few episodes. Episode 56, we're going to do 5-round reviews. We're going to. I have a lot of books that I read in the context of reading this book by Cosby, a lot of black noir and a lot of crime that I want to share, and Kurt has some as well. Episode 57, we're going to spend time with Dorothy Hughes. Remember her from a book that we both loved incredibly much. What is it called?
In a Lonely Place.
In a Lonely Place. This Lonely Place. In a Lonely Place. And rather than read that, which we've already discussed, we're going to read another book by her, The Expendable Man. And this has been on my shelf for a long time. If you haven't read it, make sure you pick it up. We're going to hopefully have fun with it. I hope it's as good as I imagine it being. Episode 58, we're going to spend time in Chicago. It's my hometown. It's my home city. And I have not read a lot of Chicago noir, so we're going to devote an episode to a subject unknown focused on Chicago noir. We have a few reads we've already selected. Readers, if you have some Chicago noir you're dying to let us know about, that isn't North and Central by Robert Hartley, let us know, because we're still open to hearing new ideas on that. Then we're going to round out our 50s with episode 59. We're going to do another deep dive on Charles Williford's Miami Blues. A lot of you have wanted us to review the old Hardboiled master's work, and this is not his early work, but it's one of his first works from the 80s, classic Hardboiled style, focused on Florida, and an incredibly gritty and also a very humorous read. So that's what you have to look forward to. I hope that piques your interest, readers. How do they contact us, Kurt, if they dare contact us?
Yes, contact us if you dare. The best way, if you have a direct question, is to email us at pointblanknoir@gmail.com. If you would like to get involved in the discussion, I believe the best place right now is our Facebook group. You can find our normal Facebook page, Point Blank Hardboiled Noir and Detective Fiction, and then there is a group associated with that page that you can join separately. It's not, there's a little bit of traffic, but not a ton. Couple posts a week, I would say, but just enough to keep us all engaged with the material. So check that out. We will look forward to hearing from you. And as always, if you want to leave a review, that's great. They do help. You can do that at iTunes is the best place to leave a review. If you want to go on YouTube, that's kind of been a growing part of our listenership on YouTube, slowly but surely growing. You can check that out there too. It's nothing different than what you get here from the podcast, but if you like that format, there it is.
Yeah, we get a lot of comments on YouTube, more than other places. So, hey, whatever. It's where the kids are going.
Yeah, next thing you know, we'll be doing it on TikTok, Justin.
I'm practicing my dance.
Good. All right. Well, we'll work on our dance moves until next time. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you.
Adios.
Point Blank is under a Creative Commons license. Music is by Justin. Copywritten works are property of their respective holders.